ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः. श्री भवानी शंकराय नमः. श्री मात्रे नमः. Jai Shankar. Let us begin today's session with the Sabha Prarambha Prarthana. Dakshinasya Samarambha Shankaracharya Madhyama Asmadacharya Paryanta Smaryat Guru Parampara Shruti Smruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaran Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutrabhashakritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Parigyanashrama Shri Guru Shankara Parigyanashrama Shankara Sadguru Keshava Vamana Krishna Panduranga Ananda Parigyana Guru Sadyojata Shankara Sadguru Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. A very warm welcome to all the viewers in this series of Atmabal. May I now request Shri Krishnanand Heblekar Ma'am to introduce today's session and talk to us about the ongoing Atmabal series as a part of the Sayujyam event. Over to you, Krishnanand Ma'am.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Shri Bhavani Shankaraya Namaha, Shri Matre Namaha. Jai Shankar and welcome to all in this program. Under the Atmabal programs, we have had a multitude of various programs right from the 1st of March 2021, and these will continue till the 15th of June 2022. This period marks the coming together of two great events which are significant: the 75th birth anniversary of Param Pujya Parigyanashram Swamiji Tritiya and the 25th year of the Mathadipatya of Param Pujya Sadyojat Shankarashram Swamiji. Under the Atmabal series, today's topic is museums, and this is being moderated by Vaishali Heblekar from Pune. Vaishali is a freelance content writer with more than 15 years of experience in communications, corporate communications mainly. Having completed her postgraduates in mass communication from Xavier's, Mumbai, she's worked extensively with public relations and branding, advertising, as well as corporate communications team for the multinational Cummins India Limited. Since 2018, she has been writing for freelance content for websites, brochures, digital marketing, manufacturing, for industries such as manufacturing, health and wellness, etc., etc. So she's the one you go to when you need your I's dotted and your T's crossed properly. What is not mentioned here is she is also an accomplished Bharatnatyam dancer and has had various performances and taught various students. Today's topic being museums. I always associated museums with big buildings, dimly lit corridors, and a musty smell. But museums have come a long way since, and today's vibrant and brightly lit museums are really beautiful. So the next time you call someone a museum piece, think again, because you may be paying him a compliment, actually. I leave Vaishali with the pleasant task of introducing our two young speakers today. Over to you, Vaishali, Jai Shankar, and thank you.
Thank you, Krishnanand ma'am. The best introduction to art is to stroll through a museum. The more art you see, the more you learn to define your own taste. It has been said that preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over a mutual concern for the future, which is what brings us to today's interesting topic on museums. The topic of museums has been especially chosen in view that Param Pujya Srimad Parignanashram Swamiji Tritiya had conceived the idea of a museum or Vastu Sangrahalaya in Shirali during his reign. He had meticulously collected a vast treasure of abandoned vigrahas which adorned the previous museum and are now enshrined in the new beautifully designed Parignanashram Vastu Sangrahalaya. Let me now introduce today's speakers, two young and budding gems in the world of museums and culture. Our first speaker, Vaidehi Savnal, has been working in the space of museums and culture for the last 10 years. She is currently heading International Relations and Education and Outreach at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. Her role involves liaising and building partnerships with international and Indian cultural institutes through collaborative projects including exhibitions, research projects, capacity building, and skill sharing programs. Alongside her role in designing and delivering the museum's academic program, Vaidehi also leads the Children's Museum and Museum on Wheels initiatives and is a faculty and part of the core curriculum team for the postgraduate diploma program in museology and conservation. She curated the exhibition What's in a Name that displayed Shakespeare's first folio at the CSMVS on loan from the British Library, co-curated the exhibition Traversing Tibet through the lens of Lee Gotami, and recently curated an exhibition for children, Entwined, India and the World. Entwined, the story of humans and animals. She has trained at the British Museum and Wellcome Trust in London. She is a TEDx speaker, having delivered a talk exploring narratives of the exhibition India and the World, a history in 9 stories. Her interests lie in exploring the potential of that museum objects and stories have in aiding the process of self-discovery and in promoting a sense of personal and societal well-being. I would like to welcome Vaidehi to the session today. Our second speaker, Shambhavi Padukone, is an art historian and museum planner. She has founded Triptych Consultancy, a firm that focuses on research and content-driven design solutions and brings together art and technology to create unique visitor experiences. With a postgraduate degree in heritage management and more than 10 years of experience in the museum field, Shambhavi and her team have had the opportunity to work on some interesting projects, like working on the corporate museum for the Indian Spinal Injuries Center, New Delhi, and the Odisha Mining Corporation, Bhubaneswar, and historical centers like the Amar Mahal Palace Museum in Jammu, Sri Parignanashram Vastu Sangrahalaya in Karnataka, and the Indian Customs and Indirect Taxes Museum in Goa, amongst others. In addition to planning and designing the museums, Shambhavi and her team has been a part of other major museums in the capacity of researchers, content developers, script writers, and graphic designers for projects like the Museum of Retrieved Antiquities at Purana Killa in New Delhi, the Tosha Khana and Warfare Museum at Gobindgarh Fort in Amritsar, and BSF Museum at Attari in Punjab, among a few others. Welcome to today's session, Shambhavi. And without taking any more time, I will now invite Vaidehi Savnal to share her thoughts and help us unbox a museum.
I would like to begin by offering my humble pranams to Swamiji for this opportunity today to speak about museums. My own journey with museums, in fact, began with an opportunity that he gave me many years ago when the new museum was being set up in Shirali. And that was my first chance of working behind the scenes. And I really think that sealed the deal for me because there's been no looking back since. My presentation today is more of a museology one-on-one to give you an idea of what a museum is all about. Next, please. People have always been immensely curious about the past, what people did before them, where they've come from. And this is actually, it reflects very strongly even in the world we live in today and our experience of it. If you think about it, everything around us is a construction of what people before us have invented, have created. And this even percolates down to our everyday lives. Everybody has things around their house that have been passed down through generations, even things like stories, recipes. These are all things that we hold very dearly to our hearts. And also, this idea of all of us constantly taking photographs, trying to document our lives, it talks about how important this idea of memory is to all of us. And that, in a sense, is what a museum is. It is a repository of human memory. Next. This is the first example of what a museum, the idea of a museum, in fact. They were called cabinets of curiosity. And the example that I have here is the print on the left is a cabinet that was assembled by Olworm. He was a Danish professor, physician, antiquarian, and natural historian. And if you look closely, you'll see that he collected a very diverse range of objects. You'll see natural history specimens, there are sculptures, there are arms and armor, there's pottery, and so much more. And another very curious cabinet belonged to Rembrandt, which you can see in the image on the right. And you can see this collection actually on display at the Rembrandt House in Amsterdam. And it's quite interesting because it gives you an idea of who these people were. They went about collecting objects that pertain to their interests, their tastes. And these little, they were not always cabinets, in fact, they were also little rooms because the collection kept growing. And these were in their homes for people to come and see, their friends, their well wishers as they came along. And not only was this an introduction to the person themselves, it was also an indicator of their taste or their social standing, so to say. But museums have actually come a very long way since then. The sector is actually quite beautifully organized. There are national and international bodies that regulate museums. There are lots of legislations in place for the running of museums and for the control of the movement of artifacts and so on. Next. This is actually a definition of a museum that the International Council of Museums put together in 2019. And it talks about the journey of a museum over the last 500 years, from the time that they were cabinets of curiosity to what they are today. I'm not going to read all of this out, it's too much to try and take in. But the idea is that a museum has evolved over time to become an inclusive space that's accessible to everyone. From the time that it used to be only a space that people's acquaintances could come and look at collections, it's moved on to a place that invites everybody, that wants everybody to feel like they have a stake in it. Next. These are a few types of museums that are popularly known, that many of you may have actually been to at some point or the other. Archaeological museums are those that are attached to an archaeological site. Usually the objects that are discovered at an excavation site are moved to a little museum for their safekeeping. And this also gives people a chance to see what is being excavated. Sometimes, of course, these collections are moved to a larger museum so that a larger number of people have access to them. Art museums are typically the ones that have beautiful paintings and sculptures, works of art, really. Natural history museums pertain to everything right from creatures that we know of only through fossil records, right up to extinct and endangered species and lots of animals, birds, insects that we see today. Science and technology museums are quite different. These talk about human inventions. They have instances of space exploration, engineering feats. There's so much that can be explored there. Historic houses are buildings that relate to either a person in history or an event that happened, or are just beautiful buildings on their own. But the contents of these buildings are really interesting because they are preserved as is from the time that these buildings were used. You have mobile museums. This is actually a new trend that has begun where museums try and take collections or exhibitions outside of their doors, trying to reach out to people to whom a museum may not be accessible. And you have encyclopedic museums. Now, these are museums that have a little bit of everything. So these span different periods of time, different material types. They represent different cultures and so on. Now, this list isn't exhaustive, but it's indicative of the expanse that museums can take. Next. Now, a question that we get asked very often is, where do museum objects come from? Of course, through time, you have artists and ateliers that have been very hard at work. Ateliers are actually workshops, and these are master artists who work with their apprentices in creating works of art. You also have families that work together, where each person, each family member specializes in a different technique, and all of these processes together aid the creation of a final object. And the picture that you see on the top right is of a little village in Raghurajpur in Odisha. This village, in fact, each family in this village practices a different form of art that's native to Odisha. And the exterior of their homes are decorated with the form of art they practice. So when you walk through this village, you get a beautiful sense of the richness of the art traditions that they practice over there. Uh, there has been a lot of debate, of course, about how much support is extended to these traditions, that they may be fading out. But the truth is that in recent times, there's actually been a huge impetus to local traditions, local forms of art, with support from the government, from corporate houses, NGOs, and so on. Then you have collections that are from patrons or royal collections. Now, wealthy people through time have always supported the arts because one is, of course, for their own personal enjoyment, because who doesn't like having beautiful things around them? But also because it speaks of a certain refinement of their own character. And often what happens is that these collections, they're displayed, of course, in palaces and historic houses and so on. But very often, when you have dynasties on the decline, when you have kings in need, the first thing they think to do is to sell off these objects as a distress sale. And that's how lots of these collections come to museums. Then you have industrial or institutional collections. And the picture on the lower right that you see, this is from the Godrej archives, and they've actually preserved every product that the company has ever created. So you have something like a typewriter, you've got locks, you've got soap, you've got refrigerators, you name it. And it's a very beautiful telling of how far the company has come in their own innovation of products. And there's many such institutions and companies that do keep a record like this. You have personal collections then, and this links very closely to the idea of cabinets of curiosity, where a person collects basically objects that pertain to their interests. And finally, you have archaeological finds, and here I'll go a little more into detail because it's quite fascinating. Next. So one wonders where, where do you begin looking for objects? How do you know where to look? So the first and I think the most obvious way to begin is that whenever you have modern construction activity, when you're excavating the earth, when creating new buildings, laying railway tracks, people come across objects that look like they don't quite belong to today's world. So you know that there is something there and then you must look further to find out. Then there are objects that are uncovered during natural disasters like floods or earthquakes, tsunamis. One actually example of that is when we had the tsunami here in India many years ago. An entire temple complex was discovered along the coast of Tamil Nadu. And these were temples that people only had heard of before. No one had actually seen them. And this evidence was made known when the tsunami occurred. Then, of course, you have oral and literary references. So there's lots of texts where people write about their times of people who came before them. And by looking very closely through all of this information and juxtaposing it with today's present geography, you're able to establish where these sites may be, and excavations are then carried out. And then finally, you have chance finds. And now I have a very favorite story of mine of a treasure trove that was discovered in India. About 75 years ago, in a little village called Bayana in Rajasthan, there were three little children called Jitmal, Babu, and Tulsi. Now, these three kids used to love going outside and playing in the fields around their house. the local Maharaja there, he was an avid hunter, and he would go on these elaborate hunting parties, and these children would like to follow him to pick up the spent cartridges that would be left behind from the hunt. So one fine day, when they were out, just combing the fields around, they came across something that didn't look like cartridges. They thought they were brass buttons, and they took them home to their parents. When their parents saw it, they were quite astonished. They realized that they were actually coins made of gold. Now, news like this, of course, spreads really fast. And when the Numismatic Society of India heard about this, they came to investigate the matter, by which time the villagers had already melted quite a lot of these coins. But what was salvaged from that bunch, when the Numismatic Society studied it, they realized that these coins actually belonged to the Gupta emperors who ruled India about 1500 years ago. And they were prolific rulers. It was a time of peace and plenty in the empire. And it was through the depictions they found on the coins that they realized that these kings were actually the ones to have revived the Vedic religion, which had seen a lull for a few centuries before that. And the coins, of course, then were sent to a lot of prominent museums around the country, but it remains one of India's largest treasure troves ever recovered. Next. Now I'll take you a little bit through the behind the scenes of what happens in a museum. You've heard, of course, of how objects can reach a museum. When they do come to a museum, the first step, of course, is documenting these objects. It's really important for a museum to maintain records of what these objects are, where they've come from, what period they belong to, what material they're made of, what those objects may have been used for, and so on. Then there's also a process of photography, and now photography happens at various stages. They're of course useful at times like this when talking to other people about the work we do, but also for research and publications. But it's also really important record of how objects change over a period of time. So for instance, if you see that a painting looks like it's fading a little bit, you'd look at older photographs, and that would help you understand if something actually was going wrong. And then you'd know to call in the experts to try and remedy the situation. Then you have storage and display. What's interesting is that most museums are not actually able to show all of their collections because the collections that museums hold are quite vast, and the space that you have in a gallery is quite limited. The moment you put an object in a gallery, you need to also provide information about it. There's a lot of context that you've got to create. So the rest of the collection, they're kept in storage, and storages are in fact custom designed for objects of different kinds. So if they were vulnerable objects like paintings, objects made of paper or organic materials, really, you would have climate control storage where temperature, humidity, and light is very carefully monitored. And this, of course, would depend from object to object. Then you have a process of research and publication. The curators in a museum are primarily the ones tasked with researching collections, but they also rely upon support from archaeologists, from art historians, and so on, to try and complete the picture of what an object may be about. And then you have curation and exhibitions. Now, a curator is someone who decides what goes on display in the galleries. They're the ones who decide how objects are grouped and so on. Now, most museums have permanent galleries where they show the most outstanding pieces of their collection almost year round. But then you have exhibitions, and exhibitions really give you a chance to break outside the mold of these permanent galleries. So permanent galleries are usually very, how should I put it? They're very specific to an object type. You'd have galleries with just paintings, galleries with just sculptures, but exhibitions really allow you to think outside of that, to creatively interpret these objects, look for new associations between different kinds of objects. And exhibitions nowadays, of course, even travel between museums because you want to make the most of the effort that's gone into creating something like that. Next. Then, of course, you have conservation and scientific analysis. Conservators are really the ones who have the best understanding of the materiality of an object. They are the ones tasked with looking after the well-being of objects. Scientific analysis is really helpful in trying to understand what an object is made of, risks that it may be susceptible to. In fact, it even gives you clues about what a previous conservator may have done to an object. It's quite fascinating, in fact. The kind of data that you're able to glean from analysis. And this actually helps a conservator prepare a plan for conservation of objects that is most suited to the particular type of object they're working on. Then you have education and outreach. Most museums today engage very actively with their audiences. And this is across the board from right from school children, college students, general visitors. We also do programs for older citizens. We do programs for special needs people. And the effort really is to try and demystify what an object is, to try and make these museum objects seem personal, to provide a sense of access to people. Then you have, of course, visitor services, and this is really important because people now look at museum going as a pastime, as a way to spend your time, and a museum needs to ensure that the experience of being at a museum is something that's enjoyable for people. This includes everything from an audio tour to a cafeteria or a shop and so on. Then there's security, because a museum, of course, has priceless objects in its collection, and both technology and manual systems are used in securing objects in a museum. And then finally, you have management and finance. Um, Museums have accountants, auditors. In fact, they even have legal aids and all kinds of other professionals, paraprofessionals that work in a museum. So a museum is no longer a space that requires just history graduates to be a part of. The field itself has opened itself up quite a bit in recent times. Next. But what makes museums most special to us as a community is the fact that we have our very own museum in Shirali. Param Pujya Parijnanashram Swamiji had a very deep interest in arts as well as the sciences. And he really took the effort of rehoming a lot of objects that were found abandoned in people's homes, sometimes deep in the jungle in the middle of nowhere. And he gave them all a home at our Mutt in Shirali. And it was in 2008 that Param Pujya Sadhyoja Shankarashram Swamiji inaugurated what we see as the new museum building now. And this building was actually constructed in the latest possible manner to give these objects the best chance for people to come and see. And you'll see that the collection is quite expansive. There's everything ranging from stone sculptures to metal objects. There's palm leaf manuscripts, copper inscriptions. There's also this beautiful ratha, which finds pride of place in the middle of the museum building. And this is the ratha that takes Lord Bhavani Shankar in procession during the Rathotsav festival. And this collection is extremely special because it encompasses almost 2000 years of human history. And you'll hear more about the museum and how it's moving with the times in the presentation that will follow. Next. And before I conclude, I want to take you through a brief exercise that we like doing with people to try and get them to think about objects in their own way. When you look at this object, this is something from the collection of the museum where I work, the CSMVS. When you look at it, it looks like a cart, correct? And you can see two wheels, you can see a harness, and you can see these little spokes that come out of the top that would have supported a roof. The spokes are, of course, made of wood. The rest of it seems like it's made of either stone or clay or something of the like. But it's when you look at the actual little description that goes with it that it starts making a little more sense. Next. So here you see that it's a miniature cart and that it's made of terracotta. Now, terracotta is burnt clay, and you see that it's from about 2500 BCE, which is about 4500 years ago. You can just imagine that long ago, a person with their own hands had created this object. It shows that they had a great understanding of fire, the fact that they were able to fire this clay model. And if you look at the size, it's not very big. It's only about between 6 and 8 inches in size. It shows that it's a miniature version of a cart, which probably indicates that it was something that a child played with. And what's really beautiful when you think about it is that in today's world, that's a gap of 4,500 years, you still have children playing with cars. And children back then and today have this very curious sense of wanting to be a grown-up, of wanting to do what grown-ups around them do. And to think that back then and today, there are adults who are actually miniaturizing all of these objects that they use otherwise in their lives for children to play with. Next. And this is actually a photograph from the site Mohenjo-daro when it was being excavated. It's about taken up almost about 100 years ago. And when you look at this photograph in the context of this cart, you would see the type of roads along which this cart would be taken. And what's really interesting is if you look at the picture very closely, you will see two carts here as well, two bullock carts. And what's fascinating is that 4,500 years later, the technology is still employed. People still use bullock carts even today. And that's really actually what museum objects are all about. It's about taking the time to observe these objects, trying to make sense of it them on your own, using your imagination and trying to see what these objects are all about. So I urge you all that the next time you visit a museum, to take your time really to observe objects around you and try and find your own personal connect to these beautiful objects that were created. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I now hand over to Shambhavi Padukone, who will take you through some contemporary practices that have evolved in the museum sector. Jai Shankar.
Jai Shankar. Thank you, Vaidehi. So, museum experience for visitors has evolved dramatically over the years. It has become more interactive, more participatory, more engaging in ways that would have been unimaginable even 20 or even 10 years ago. So this presentation will be a glimpse into the world of the 21st century museums, where the focus is on creating immersive and engaging storytelling environments. By this I mean that the object or the collection of the objects are presented in such a manner that it suggests a story or a sequence of events that has an emotional meaning or connect with the audience. So in order to conceptualize and create such environments, the traditional disciplinary boundaries have to be more porous, and there must be a willingness to incorporate new media, new technologies, and new strategies for museum interpretation. So planning such a museum today would involve a wide range of expertise, from programmers to artists to sculptors to craftspersons, poets, musicians to technology experts, scholars, and the list can go on depending on the requirement of the project. So the video you see here is of the Virasat-e Khalsa Museum at Anandpur Sahib in Punjab. So this was a bold and, to an extent, I would even say a revolutionary step in the history of museums in India. The galleries here were designed to create immersive experiences. And contrary to general perception that museums should house historical artifacts, here the exhibits were created out of a combination of large hand-painted murals, dioramas, relief paintings, 3D interpretive installations, as well as hand-woven tapestries. In a sense, the visuals created are the artifacts that convey the story here. So such museums are possible today due to two main reasons. First, the audience expectations has changed dramatically, especially in response to the digital entertainment scenario that we have today, the video games, the internet. People are no longer just content to sit back and passively be passive viewers. So they want to feel, they want to be part of an experience. So these sort of museums give you an immersive experience where you walk through the exhibits come out alive. Then there's the wow factor where suddenly something appears. So this new frontier of immersive storytelling is a desire for something more physically interactive, more multisensory, and basically that awakens our bodies and senses. Moreover, compared to exhibits with traditional text and labels, panels, immersive exhibits have a much wider appeal from children to older visitors. So now all museums do not have the budget or the space like the example I just showed you. So this was a 400 crore project. So the question is, how are museums going to tackle this challenge of creating immersive experiences, storytelling environments? So the answer is through experimentation, because we see today a proliferation of museums who are installing sound and light shows, interactive multi-user learning stations, multimedia and simulations. So some are dabbling with sensory enhancements while others are plunging into virtual reality. So basically every museum today is looking at ways to bring in that element of immersion and engagement within their museum. So these kind of experimentations are happening across India in varying degrees, depending on the budget, the space, even maintenance is a big issue when you talk about incorporating such kind of technology. It's not always possible to maintain it. It's easy to set it up, but how are you going to maintain it? You need the manpower. So it's a lot of planning that's involved when you take up such a project. So this brings me to the Srimad Prajnanashram Vastu Sangrahalaya, our very own museum at Shirali, which is reinventing itself with the time from the very beginning, as it has been introduced, as in the introduction and as well as in Vaidehi's presentation. We know how the museum collection was painstakingly put together by our Pujya Prajnanashram Swamiji and finally made its way into the current museum building. Also, this was one of the first projects that our Swamiji had given me the opportunity to work with when I set up my own firm. So to bring in some elements of immersion and engagement, we designed one gallery in the museum that presents the story of the Guru Parampara. This was an essential story to present in the museum as it provided the context to the collection, as well as it forms the very basis or the very reason for the existence of this museum. Also, the connection of the museum to the Sri Chitrapur Mutt. So I'll just highlight some aspects of the design. So as we enter, we introduced a design installation that frames the portrait of Prajnanashram Swamiji as soon as you enter, putting that into context. And also it aids, works as a visitor flow management. So this is one of the most dominant and prominent features as a visitor sees upon entering the museum is the large wooden rath and the double height wall right behind it. So the wall is basically a fiber sheet with slanted metal slats forming a grate. We plan to use this surface to present the fully adorned rath to give an idea to the visitors of how the rath during the Rathotsav it looks like. So there's a slight illusion at play here. So this is photographed while the work was, we had just, during the painting was going on. So because of the angle of the slats, the full painting of the rath is only visible from one side of the museum, where you see this. From the other side, you can only get a glimpse of it. So it's a sort of a reveal as you walk through into the museum. So these are some elements that once, as soon as you enter, you don't notice it, but suddenly as you go through gallery A and B, you suddenly see this entire picture that comes through. So going to the gallery D, which was the main highlight of the museum here right now, the exhibit here. The objective was to create a unique visitor experience. Our approach to the design was a multidisciplinary one, wherein artifacts were showcased in contemporary display systems, and the overall design was planned as an integration of vernacular motifs and new media to basically to assist in creating an engaging experience. So we had undertaken research visits to Gokarn and Mallapur, to the various temple, our mutts, and to the Keladi temple and museum. So we picked up these elements of how a pillar is designed, traditional pillars, traditional architectural forms. So we use these in our designs, wherein we placed the objects within this context. So if you can see the picture here, so you have a before and after, what it was before and how the space was transformed. So here again, we have not used, the use of technology has been minimal, because given the climatic conditions, which is mostly hot and extremely humid, the challenges of maintaining any electronic equipment is immense and the pressure is too much. So we decided we'd go with more traditional forms, art and illusion, and play with 3D. So here we had created the scene of Koti Tirtha, so in a layered backlit art form. So to move on to other examples, this was another museum, Indian Spinal Injury Center. So here, this museum is about the founding chairman, Major H.P.S. Ahluwalia, his life story. It's an incredible journey from. He was one of the first. He was part of the 1965 expedition team that scaled the Mount Everest. And during the 1965 war, he was shot, and where he was wounded, and he was rendered to a wheelchair. And this is what gave rise to the Indian Spinal Injury Center. He set it up. So the hospital this story had to be captured and presented. So here we used technology that was we used technology in very interesting ways here. So we used 3D projection mapping, where there was a model of the Everest, a scaled model of the Everest, and we had projected on it as to how what route that particular expedition had taken up. So along with the information, the photographs, these were elements that created the wow factor. So this was the Silk Route expedition that had been undertaken by the founder chairman of the hospital. This is the Amar Mahal Palace Museum. Here again, the technology was limited, the project scope was limited, the budget was constricted. So within this scope of work, there is a series of 49 miniature paintings of the Nala Damayanti in the Kangra School of painting, miniature painting style. So earlier, if you see the previous way of displaying, it was just the painting and one caption. So it's very difficult to make sense of something like this. And when there are 49 of them, you'd hardly ever pay attention. Maybe you'd see one and then you'd walk through. So this is what we noticed with the visitors when we were doing our initial survey. So what we did was we took each painting and we highlighted specific aspects of the painting so that the visitor, so you see the panel in front. So the visitor has a way to get into the painting and find out more for themselves. So we just give them a little aid, a little helping hand, if you can say that, to what to look for in paintings, in these series of paintings. So these were some of the museums that I was involved in personally, so I had presented it here. So here are some of the other examples. I was part of these projects as well in different capacities. Here the DS Group, it's a corporate museum. So this is a very immersive space where they are basically Sugandhis, the Rajnigandha group. So this was like a walk-through forest that we had created where you had various like kevda, sandalwood. So as you entered each zone, there was a motion sensor triggered scent dispersal unit that we had placed. So as soon as you would enter the kevda section, you'd read about it, you'd see what it was all about, and you would suddenly get this scent of kevda all around you. And then when you go to the sandalwood section, you'll get a sandalwood thing. So they're very subtle, and it creates a very engaging experience for the visitor. Then at the Virasat-e Khalsa, here we had created this life-size, slightly smaller than life-size, walkthrough of 18th century marketplace of Amritsar during Maharaja Ranjit, just before Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time. Then this was another project at Mumbai, Chinmay Pradeep, where Swami Chinmayananda's life and teachings were depicted in an outdoor space. So here the museum comes alive only once the sun starts setting. So these were some of the examples where the current trends where we are breaking away and getting into more experimental, experiential, immersive experiences, where objects, historical objects, as well as newer methods of presenting, showcasing. That's why storytelling becomes a very important method to convey. So overall, these examples show the creative application of art, technology. Interpretation can be particularly effective when attempting to create these sort of rich environments. So creating immersive storytelling environments is exciting not just for the technology it involves, but for the impact it has on helping people view themselves as part of the story. So by this, I conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Shambhavi. Thank you, Vaidehi. Wow, this has been really, really insightful. And after these presentations, let us spend some time in taking questions that people have shared with us through the Google form link that was circulated. The first question that I would like to ask Vaidehi is, what professional qualifications are needed in order to be employed at a museum?
I'm actually glad this question has come up. Like you would have seen in my presentation, it's the museum's field itself has expanded so much in recent times, and there's space for everybody really. But if it's curation that you're interested in, curating a museum, yes, a history or an art history degree, or I mean, something in that space is preferable. If you're looking at a career in conservation, it helps to have a degree in science or even fine art. That can be quite useful. If you want to work as a museum educator, we have people with degrees in teaching, B.Ed and so on. So there's space for everybody. There's also, of course, people with finance. Museums in recent times have also started actively fundraising. So we have a lot of people who are in the know-how about financial compliance, auditing, so on. So there's really that, like I said, there is scope for everybody who wants to make a career. Shambhavi, is there? Do you think I've missed anything out?
As Vaidehi stated, this is for being part of the museum. I can add to this, I would like to add, if you're going to be part of planning and designing and setting up of a museum, the list of qualifications, what you need to do, what you are really varied. So we employ various people, architects are involved, architects, designers, artists are involved. We get on to create our artifacts. We have actually employed craftspeople who are into wood carving. So any kind of profession that you are, any kind of expertise that you have can be used in planning a setting up of a museum. Of course, while if you have to run the museum, you come in as only as maintenance to keep up, to keep the exhibits, for their upkeep. But yeah, I think Vaidehi's covered most of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Vaishali?
Thank you. The second question, this I'll ask you, Shambhavi. History being a controversial subject, how does a museum respond to new opinions being formed regularly?
This is this is a controversial question as well when it comes to museums. So, to a large extent, museums do try and not get into controversial subjects. You'll see for a lot of museums in Punjab, they will not. They will talk up till they will present up till the partition period, but they will not talk about the Blue Star operation. They'll just not. There's no mention of it. It's if you have to see history through museums in Punjab, that is something that will never feature. But private museums are a little more experimental in that sense, where if we take, for example, the whole issue of Aryan invasion versus migration versus indigenous, that theory, private museums are a little more bold in taking up these questions, addressing it, or at least bringing it forward. It may lead to controversy, arguments, but that's a good thing because it generates discussion. So the more museums actually bring these subjects to the foreground, it's better because at least there's a discussion about it. Otherwise, you'll just be brushing it under the carpet. So if Vaidehi has anything to add.
I would agree. Actually, I think a lot of it depends upon the who's the decision maker in a museum really, and I think though I mean speaking from the point of view of a museum that's autonomous, there is a lot of focus on staying alert to these to new research that's happening and responding very actively to it, and in the context where I work, I think the focus is also on providing equal information about very diverse opinions, and allowing a visitor to sort of make their own interpretation of it, because however unbiased a viewpoint you offer, the visitor is the one who comes with a internal bias, always. So they will anyway make of it what they can. So the role of a museum really is to try and uh, present as balanced a picture as possible, and I think a lot of museums are actively working towards achieving that.
Okay. So Vaidehi, how does an object qualify to be a part of a museum?
Well, I think Shambhavi has actually broken a few myths there about museums needing to have objects at all. The idea really is that anything that's a reflection of our past, that sort of chronicles this journey that we've had as mankind, can actually qualify to be a museum object. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be exotic. It doesn't need to be inlaid with precious metals on stones or anything. It doesn't need to have been created by a master artist. So anything that really talks about this journey that we've had, I think can qualify to be a museum object. And I'm sure now if I hand over to Shambhavi, she will talk about museums that don't need objects.
Yeah. So any object that can convey a story or aid in conveying a story or emotion, anything that can help in building that connect with the visitor is a potential object for to be displayed in a museum. That's about it.
Okay. So, Shambhavi, how does a museum preserve its vast treasures of various kinds, like paper, glass, stone, wood carving?
No, a lot of museums, they have their own conservation department. If not, they hire conservators to annually take care of their. So there are basic methods, there are basic precautions that museums do have to take care of when they are displaying their objects. The list for each is different, how paper is treated. By far, stone is the most resilient. So, but paper, the climate, the fluctuation in temperatures will definitely affect it. So, I think Vaidehi is handling a lot of the conservation aspects in the museum. So maybe she can throw more light on this.
There's actually a lot of focus on preventive care itself. So right from the how an object is kept in the gallery, what kind of showcase, what materials are used in creating a showcase, when objects are kept in a storage system, what the shelves are made of, what kind of boxes they are placed in. There's a lot of attention to detail for all of this, and like Shambhavi said, each object type has its very specific requirements. Largely we have objects of two kinds, organic and inorganic. So the organic objects are the ones that are made from plant or animal remains, and these are the ones that are actually more susceptible to deterioration. And again, for a variety of reasons, temperature, humidity, light, even, and they're the ones that attract insects and pests and things. So there's a lot of preventive care itself that's undertaken in ensuring that you never reach a point where they start deteriorating. But of course, if they do, you have conservators, and conservators are usually trained in very specific object types. So they know very keenly how to offer a treatment that's catering to that particular object type.
Interesting. So the next question that I have for you, Vaidehi, is what is the differentiator for the Parignanashram Vastu Sangrahalaya in Shirali? How can it become a world-class museum?
Well, I think the word world class can be interpreted in many ways. What I do feel is that in terms of the construction of the building itself, the way the objects have been treated by conservators, the way they're displayed in the gallery, the amount of effort taken towards upkeep of the collection, things like lighting and all of this, I do feel that is world class, because that's the best that you can offer to the collection. And I do think that no effort has been spared on that front. Experts have been consulted at various points in time to offer these objects the best sort of environment to live in. In terms of the popularity or how well known a museum is, I think that's quite subjective, and I think it's more important to focus on what the intent of a museum is. I don't think every museum needs to aspire to the same level of fame in that sense. And I think what sets the differentiator, what really sets SPVS apart, is the fact that the entire collection was assembled by our guru. The objects in the collection, of course, a lot of it are objects that belong to our previous gurus. And I think that is really where this is what sets the museum apart for us as a community. And there's, of course, apart from all of us, there's lots of tourists who come and visit the museum. There are lots of schools and colleges in the area, lots of people who otherwise also come and see it. Shambhavi, is there anything you might...
So you've covered most of it, but again, when it comes to world class, the fact that a museum, no matter what scale it is at, it is evolving with time. It is bringing in innovations as and when required at regular intervals. The fact that it is not static itself is a very important factor that keeps a space alive. The connect that we as members of the community have with that space is also what keeps it apart. The world class, the word is a little problematic in the sense, what do you mean by world class? Do you mean it's a very air-conditioned space with a nice cafe and a museum shop? Then a lot of museums are not world class then in that case. See, but the experience that you have, the relevance of the museum also, the fact that in if you look at it in a larger in a map of India, our museum is actually in a small village on the coastal belt where nobody really would know that there is something like this. The collection is impressive. It covers history of many, many years. So the scholars who are in the know of things, people who want to know, they will find this place. So world class, yes, to us, this is a world class museum.
Yes, so rightly said. So the last question to you is, what challenges do museums or palaces or even places of historical interest in India face in preserving and maintaining exhibits? Does the Parignanashram Vastu Sangrahalaya also face similar issues? And if yes, how can these issues be resolved?
This is a very vast subject actually. It covers full maintenance, preserving, depending on where the location is, how it's to be. Pardon me, there's some static coming. Vaidehi, why don't you just take it up? I'll.
So I think there's different kinds of problems, and these really differ from place to place. Like we've said, climate can play a huge role in how objects are maintained, and the amount of effort that you need to put in then to ensure their well-being. Apart from that, I think conservation as a practice is still growing in India. It has improved in leaps and bounds in recent times. But still, compared to what other countries have been able to achieve, I think we have a long way to go in terms of training people, with providing them with certain skill sets to be able to make correct conservation decisions. There's also a lot of wrong conservation that can happen. So it's also about ensuring that people are properly educated about what they need to do. And then, of course, the usual issues like lack of funding, lack of resources, that sort of those sort of problems. But again, with the SPVS specifically, I think the bulk of the collection, in fact, the fact that it survived all of these years, this talks about the inherent strength of a lot of objects. Like Shambhavi had previously mentioned, that stone is quite resilient as a material in itself. So a lot of the stone sculptures, a lot of the metal sculptures are actually by and large stable. It's some of the organic material objects that, of course, require more attention. And actually, many museums don't actually have in-house conservators. And it's when problems are noticed in a collection that you often call in experts to then help you out. Shambhavi, would you like to add?
Yeah. So, in terms of preserving, and a lot of it depends on community awareness as well. The people living around such historical buildings, places, they need there should be there is, to a large extent, in many places there is a drive to create awareness. There's a general volunteer schemes that come up to keep maintain the space. So these are little things that, as laymen, as being part of a society, we can do to preserve these places. So there are many heritage walks, there are campaigns going on that bring about. So maintenance, the scientific aspect of it is taken care of by the organization that owns that space. But as lay members, it is our responsibility as well to know what. So we cannot demand that. For instance, it's difficult. We shouldn't be demanding things that are impossible to maintain in the long run. So we may take up a very great project right now and spruce it up, a historical building. But if we don't take up the right methods, that's within a few years it's going to deteriorate again. So, yeah.
Yes.
Community.
So thank you so much, Vaidehi and Shambhavi. Thank you very, very much for answering these questions. If the audience has any additional questions from today's presentation, feel free to write on scmsayujyam@gmail.com and we will get back to you with answers. I would now like to extend a vote of thanks before I end the session. First and foremost, to our Param Puja Sadyojat Shankarashram Swamiji, for all the love and blessings he showers on us by providing us such opportunities for learning. Pranams to Pujya Swamiji. A big heartfelt gratitude to the Sayujyam team for tirelessly working on interesting topics for all of us to learn from. A huge thank you to the back-end team for all the technical support. And thank you to our viewers and audience for their patient hearing and sending us their lovely questions. Thank you once again, Vaidehi and Shambhavi, for giving such a wonderful glimpse into the world of museums. We will now conclude with the Sabha Samapti prayers. Nandantu sadhaka sarve vinashyantu vidushakaha avastha shambhavi mestu prasannostu guru sada sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschid dukkham apnuyat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.